Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Adobe Live for Business. I think everyone will agree watching this that over the last 12 months or so, our health and the health of our loved ones, not just our local communities, but across the world, has never been in such focus. Similarly, the systems and the infrastructure responsible for the support of our healthcare has rarely been discussed as much or as broadly. My name is Paul Ditchfield, and I am the head of enterprise sales at Adobe in the UK. And today it's my pleasure to talk to Dr. Keith Grimes at Babylon Health to understand how, I think what we can all agree, in the face of the most challenging public health crisis in over 100 years, how technology has played a pivotal role in supporting both clinicians and patients through these unprecedented times. Keith, it is a pleasure to talk to you today. Perhaps you can take a moment or two just to introduce yourself, Babylon Healthcare, and its mission.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Keith Grimes. My background is a UK-based general practitioner or family practitioner since 2000, with an interest in urgent care. So the sort of thing when you need to see a doctor quickly, I'm the kind of doctor that you would come and see. But alongside that, I have a lifelong passion for technology, even since going to medical school back in the early 90s. And I've constantly been trying to find a way to bring the power of technology to help me practice my medicine, but also increase its reach. So since joining Babylon Health back in 2018, I've been afforded a rare opportunity to be able to participate in that. And I'm the Clinical Digital Health and Innovation Director at Babylon Health. Babylon Health is a health technology company that provides video consultation services, as well as digital health and clinical artificial intelligence powered tools to allow people to not only care for themselves, but also help scale and deliver healthcare around the world.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Keith. I mean, and I know you haven't always worked at Babylon Health, as you just kind of mentioned, but you know, we've seen a number of companies transform their business using digital technologies over the last 10 years or so. I guess the perception amongst the public, and certainly those that aren't in the heat of the action within health provision, is that healthcare is like behind a little bit. Do you think that that's fair? And I guess supplemental question, what's Babylon been doing that might change that, and what impact have they had in doing that?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that is a fair point to make, and it's maybe actually slightly less fair to ask now after the events of the last year, but certainly leading up to this, I think it's reasonable to say that healthcare was maybe not quite as far ahead in terms of the implementation of technology or digitalization as compared to other sectors. I suppose I can talk about that in three kind of chunks. I mean, I used to joke that, going into work as being a doctor, you'd have to set your clock back 10 years when it came back to the technology you had. And actually, up until recently, I think that still was entirely the case. The use of fax machines for sending information here and there, the dependence on paper, particularly in secondary care, the fact that patients and doctors would use technology at home and then park that when they came into work really illustrated that the world was a little bit further ahead than where we were in healthcare. Now, there's actually probably a number of very good reasons for that, not least of which healthcare is an area where you really want to be very careful about safety, very careful about quality, and it's definitely also true that healthcare workers really want to see evidence of benefit before they implement things. So there's this naturally slightly conservative streak that runs through it all, which means that change happens relatively slowly in healthcare in normal circumstances. And we'll come to that in a moment. And so the first years when I was working within the NHS, I graduated in 1996. And then when I was a GP from the early 2000s, that was around about the time of the first .com boom. And you started to see practices using websites and so on, but the internet was still fairly early days. So a lot of the first work that I did was about implementing what appears to be fairly simple things: electronic referrals, electronic discharges, electronic communication, and even prescriptions electronically. And that was back in the early noughties. I was still working on projects like that into the tens and, you know, up to even 2014 and 15. Some of the work that I did on the summary care record, which is providing us a shared record securely, was really coming to play around about 2011, 12. So things were moving very, very slowly. And that was a frustration. You know, it was difficult to get things changed. I spent a lot of my own career working within the NHS as an IT lead and then an innovation lead. There was this sense that people wanted to see change, but it was very, very difficult to get changes that were made in small scale in little places and getting them scaled elsewhere. Now, a lot of work within the NHS has happened on that recently to try and scale innovation, but even so, it's mostly small, like champions, patients or doctors working, and then developing solutions and trying to scale it was very, very hard. Now, enter Babylon at this point. So Babylon Health is a company founded by, a private company founded by Ali Parsa back in 2013 with the mission to provide accessible and affordable, put an accessible and affordable healthcare system in the hands of every person on earth. And that mission was started because if you think back to the United Kingdom in the early 2010s to 2020s, about 2013, around about that time, people were finding it quite difficult to get routine healthcare. If you wanted a routine appointment, not an urgent appointment, but a routine appointment, it could in some places take between 2 and 3 weeks to get that care. So demand was high and supply was constrained. And in that, there was patient dissatisfaction. So one of the first things that Babylon did was try to introduce a way of closing that down with video consultations, the ability for people to be able to consult with a doctor over the phone, over the smartphone that they have in their hand, using similar technology to Skype or FaceTime or whatever. And introducing that and launching that around about, it was, I think, April, it was back in 2014 was the first app that came out. Around about then, that's when we started to see the first interest in our product.
Okay. I mean, the development into that product, again, you timelining that back to kind of 6 years. So clearly there was a lot going on before the last 12 months and the pandemic hitting and COVID-19. What impact did that have on your business, and how did Babylon adapt in terms of just its day-to-day, but then also, given that you're in the healthcare space, in terms of supplementing or launching new products and services?
Yeah, so actually, like if we just scroll back slightly before COVID, there were some things that happened between the launch of the product back in 2014 and in those sort of subsequent 5 years, 6 years, what happened. And they set Babylon fair to be able to respond when COVID arrived. So the first is video consultations allow you to provide care remotely. I mean, it was launched in the sense that it's actually a very convenient, accessible thing for people to be able to deal with some of their problems remotely. You still have to see people face to face, of course, and actually setting up a service around that so people who can be seen remotely are seen remotely, but they can quickly get seen face to face if they need to, was like tool number one in this toolkit. And the second tool was the introduction of self-care. So when we launched, we had the ability for people to ask questions remotely. So a lot of people will say, you know, I just want to ask one question. I wish I could email my GP or message them. So we set up a service which would allow for that. What was interesting about that is that we found that there are questions that can be automatically responded to. And that led to us introducing an automated symptom checker, which we launched back in June 2016. So people were able to ask questions and find out information about what might be causing their symptoms or when to be seen next. So that's tool number two, empowering people to care for themselves and work out when they need to be seen. So remotely seen, quickly get seen face to face, and that. And we brought that all together with GP at Hand, which is our NHS general practice offering, which we launched back in 2017. And that was a digital first practice. Your first contact would be through your smartphone, through your app. And at that time, that was actually quite revolutionary. And a lot of people really doubted whether this would work at all. We started with around about 3,000 patients, but now GP at Hand has got 7 clinics based in London and Birmingham. We've got over 90,000 patients. We're essentially one of the largest GP practices in England as well. And that was occurring even prior to COVID. So we have these tools to allow for, you know, high quality, safe, remote care. All of that's in place. So COVID arrives. COVID arrives in the early part of 2020. And what happens there is it just basically presses down on the need to be able to provide remote care. So we had invested very heavily in this. We'd done a lot of development. We actually had a service that operated very well. So when COVID arrived, interestingly, the number of people who wanted to be seen remotely rose, of course, but people were very, very careful about wanting to care for them, going to see the health service, because they were getting messages that you can't go into hospital or see doctors because they're going to be overwhelmed. So people had an increased need to be able to care for themselves. But if they did need to be seen, they wanted to be seen 24/7 and remotely. All the work that we put in beforehand, therefore, puts us in a very good position to serve the needs of our patients. And that's exactly what happened at the start. There was also a great need at the start. If everyone casts their mind back to the start of the lockdown, the information was changing very, very quickly. It was like, how long is this? What sort of symptoms? Do masks work? How long should we isolate for? What does lockdown actually mean? So there was this swirling information that was changing. People are not very used to this. And so a big part of the work that we had to do was try and become a trusted source of information in the areas that we worked in. So our teams would look at the government guidance and then distill that into a form that our members could use, but also translate it into the products that we offered.
Yeah, right. Excellent, thank you. I mean, you've talked about a kind of digital first, I guess, imperative, and then that became, if you like, the situation took over, so the digital first became the best vehicle for so many new people to enter this service and then take advantage of it. Within all the kind of the chaos and the drama of those early days, you didn't just adapt your business, you actually launched a new product as well, right, with the COVID-19 care assistant. So, how do you go about doing that? I mean, launching a new product, all the things that you would have typically done beforehand. How do you do that when it's not even just digital first? It's essentially digital only. And I guess what additional challenges did you come up against in the current climate?
Yeah, so no, you're right. I mean, when you look back and you think that was maybe a cracker's time to be doing this, but we start from the fact that we established a very good team. There's some, I'm very fortunate to work with some extremely skilled people who were very reactive to the problems that arose. So we had this foundation to be able to deliver the service that our members needed. But there were still some new problems that came up. It's about how to answer questions from people quickly and answer that, and also help them understand, could the symptoms be COVID? What do I need to do? Can I stay at home? How do I get help? And so on. So we were presented with a new problem and some existing tools that we could adapt, but also the need to build, again, some new tools. I know I'm using this tool analogy, but I think it really helps to think of it that way. These are different ways to help us provide care. And so the first thing that we did is that we thought, well, we're going to have to adapt our symptom checker to be able to help people check if they had coronavirus. Now, what is important is that our symptom checker is a medical device. It's subject to regulation as a medical device, and it's also a digital health tool that's used for providing care. So we have certain standards of safety that we have to meet as well. Now, COVID or not, you still have to do this. So one of the first pressures was trying to find a way to continue to meet this high standard, but also move at pace and move in a way that was flexible to allow us to respond to the changing situation. That was one of the principal challenges of the early part of the lockdown that we put into place with our COVID symptom checker. But then we also had to put into place the ability for people, they may ask a symptom checker and say they do or don't have COVID maybe, and they have some other questions. But what do you do if the only option then is to have a video consultation? If video consultations are being very heavily squeezed as well. And that's when we introduced the COVID care assistant and the ability for people to ask questions through a sort of asynchronous messaging service to be able to speak to non-clinical but trained staff to answer some of their questions more generally, and if necessary, be escalated. Again, it's using the technology to empower people to care for themselves if necessary, but if not, rapidly get them to the right person. And that's something that we developed, launched, and shared out, and has worked very well throughout lockdown as well. And now we found the COVID care symptom checker is used not only here in the UK, but in a number of our different regions as well.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess through that and through that kind of that agility, do you think that has and then I guess how the health service has responded? Do you see that it's a watershed moment, or that you expect to see a step change now in digital health services, and how this whole part of healthcare will evolve?
Yes, I do. And I feel that whilst Babylon we've played our part in this, it's not just us. We've seen this across the healthcare service. And I've seen it most clearly here within the UK and the National Health Service, is that at the same time as we've been doing this, there's been a very, very rapid adoption of video consultation services and remote care within the National Health Service as well. There's been a real appetite where previously there's many reasons not to introduce this technology. They were finding reasons not to. All of a sudden, no, we have a pressing problem. We have to do this. So some of the barriers fell away, and projects that either weren't happening or were taking a long time to introduce have all of a sudden been introduced, been shown to make a substantial difference in terms of providing care that is both safe and high quality, and patients like it. So all those things that people were worried about that were maybe stopping them, in some cases have gone. And I think that's changing the perception of risk, the appetite for change within the NHS and within healthcare systems as a whole. Something that we had addressed beforehand and we're now continuing to do, I'm hoping is much more widely adopted, because this will lead to a greater pace of high quality and safe innovation. So we've had this opportunity, we've responded to the problem, a problem that's still here with COVID, of course. But let's use those sort of things that we've learned to deal with either the existing problems or some of the problems that are going to emerge over time. Problems with dealing with the large-scale vaccination effort, how we track people, how we help people with chronic diseases when the world has been focused on acute diseases for so long, how we deal with the challenge of long COVID, that sort of longer form. These are things that we're going to need to keep that kind of passion for innovation and change.
Yeah. And outside of COVID, I mean, were there things that, rightly or wrong, were there areas of therapeutic need or things like that were maybe put on the back burner, and things like the COVID care system accelerate and come to the fore? So I guess, what does your development pipeline look like in terms of new products, new initiatives, and the different types of services that Babylon may be able to offer in the short term and the long term, to be fair?
So actually, that's a really good question, because you could look at what we did and think that actually it was reacting to a lot of the acute problems, and we created a solution that would work for that. But what's interesting about that is that what we were developing were the parts of an integrated care solution. I think we all accept that it's sometimes not fair to ask the least trained or the sickest people, as in sometimes the patients, to have to make determinations of when they should see a doctor, carry the information with them, be responsible for integrating their care. We should work very, very hard on doing that to make their path as smooth as possible, to make sure that the data follows the person. So when any doctor or nurse or healthcare professional provides care, they have all the information in hand. This is something that we wanted beforehand. And then COVID arrives, and then we focus it very much on COVID. But actually, it just shows that this is important, and means that, yes, to pursue integrated care, to deliver integrated care is important. And it's important for chronic diseases. We know already that we're having to focus on large numbers of people going into hospital, elective surgeries being delayed. People are worried about going to see their doctor with something that they don't think is a pressing problem. And I think that bodes ill if we're not careful for how chronic diseases are managed. So where we're looking at right now is better ways to integrate the service, to mean that the patient flows readily into the GP or primary care, and then on to secondary care or hospital, and then back out as necessary, that the information flows with them in a seamless way. And if we do that, we can we can help provide higher quality care and help to reduce costs. Because of course, whilst in the NHS you don't have to pay for care when you're receiving it, and that's a wonderful thing, it still costs money to provide care. So it's important for us all to make the best use of that.
So you've talked about, you mentioned innovation on a couple of occasions there, and more in terms of, I guess, the how Babylon using that to go to market with these new services and support patients and clinicians, obviously. But if you were to look ahead at some of the strategic big bets that Babylon Healthcare are making from their overall business perspective, what do you see as some of the key technologies to help those big bets?
Okay, so I'd say that the kind of the big bets going forward are a little bit like I've outlined so far, is about integrating care, about making sure that high quality, secure data moves with the patient. And maybe something that I haven't talked about quite as much, but is a big part of matching that gap between demand and supply, is the ability to use automation, either artificial intelligence to automate decision making, or other forms of automation to allow for care. So there's a number of different ways that that might manifest. And one of the first ones is about remote monitoring or remote care. So talked a little bit before about the use of video consultations to be able to care for people at home, or phone consultations or messaging, or whatever platform the preference of the person. Being able to do that asynchronously, so you don't have to be live with the person, allows you to make the best use of a clinician's time. And finding a way to match the right patient to the right healthcare professional is a very important step. I think the next big area that I want to look at actually hinges around the use of data. And so having high quality patient data to help us better understand who the patients and the members are and what the risk of them having problems might be, allows us to target interventions to help them. So a person who has a low risk of certain diseases may actually benefit from a relatively light touch and just some guidance on how to maintain wellness now. Whereas there may be some people who have a chronic disease, high risk of chronic disease, that you might want to intervene, or even people with chronic diseases that are at high risk of admission to hospital. The important next steps are to use technologies like artificial intelligence to help better understand and risk stratify those populations, and then target efforts accordingly. So that's part one. But the other exciting part is also, well, if we can identify who needs help, the next question is, what help do they need? And last year, Babylon researchers published in Nature Communications an amazing paper about the use of artificial intelligence to establish causation, or a causative factor behind an outcome, as opposed to mere correlation. And the important thing about that is that that then allows us to better understand cause and effect, and work backwards and allow us to look at these different populations, the high, medium, and low risk, and then simulate which interventions might work for them and personalize it at scale. So AI has a really important part to use all this information, but really personalize it so people can know that the things that they should be doing are most likely to positively affect their health. I think that's a really, really exciting and interesting area, and something that we're going to see evolve over the next few years.
I know when we've spoken in the past, you talked about the number of, the number of calls or search requests that are made through Google to do with healthcare on a daily or weekly basis, and that kind of that big data set, if you like, and how that can drive outcomes. Sure. Again, if you look even further afield, are there some key things that you're keeping your eye on in terms of new but exciting and developing areas, both from a technology perspective or just a healthcare perspective, mutually exclusive, and how you maybe see those paths converging?
One of the things that I love about my job is that I'm very curious about this. I love looking at all these different areas, and the thing that excites me most is seeing practical applications of it. So let's look at some of those technologies. I've always been very interested in wearables. I've got this here is a smart ring. It tracks my pulse and temperature, and and the like,
Right.
uh, and the use of wearables. Many people have Fitbits, Apple Watches, and so on, and they're kind of consumer grade. But over time, the quality of that is improving all the time, and the insights that you get from it are improving all the time. So I think when you wrap that into remote monitoring, you see companies like Apple with the Apple Watch tracking pulse, but also ECG or single lead ECG, and maybe even oxygen saturations, taking some steps in that area. These aren't medical grade devices, but you can conceive of a time when you're getting a much richer signal. That's a very, very interesting area as well. And then when you combine that with AI, when you've got these multiple signals, AI, and particularly a form of AI called deep learning, can help extract features or information from this data that is otherwise not really visible to a clinician. And a good example of that is I've seen papers showing that AI can determine a person's blood sugar, which is important in diabetes, from changes in their ECG, which is the electrical activity of the heart. Now, this is something that I think a human would be extremely hard pushed to do, at least do accurately. Yet there's evidence that there are hidden patterns inside this data that can allow us to do that in a non-invasive way. I think that's incredibly exciting area. I think another area that I'm interested in is the use the use of quantum technologies as well, which basically massively scale our ability to be able to make computations on this data. I think that's very interesting. And I suppose the final bit, and this is the more practical, is I love the rise of the patient as the captain of their own ship and not waiting, using the solutions, coming up with solutions to their problems, investigating in citizen science. I think that's a tremendous area. And the leveling of the power playing field, I think, is to everyone's good.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, I could talk to you about this all day, to be honest. I know we have a finite amount of time to run this session over. I guess just in terms of closing out, one last question. You mentioned earlier that when you run through, if you like, of your career, a timeline of your career. Obviously, you haven't been at Babylon Health for all of your career, although a big part of your experience is in healthcare more broadly. I guess for those people that might be watching this, what kind of advice, experience have you picked up along the way that you would like to share with them, and maybe help them in their careers, or any open questions that they might have at this time?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things to say, and I'll try and keep it more general as opposed to just specific for healthcare. But as I said before, I've always been a geek. I've always loved technology, and in the early 90s, computers were kind of useful, but they were never thought to be something that could actually deliver healthcare or make the changes that they have. So I think the first thing is to say is that if you have a passion for something, be patient. It took me a long time to get my role inside Babylon, and along the way, I tried a lot of different ways into it. Medicine still doesn't have a dedicated sort of career path for the digitally obsessed doctor. That's changing slightly. So what I had to do along the way was spend time finding my tribe. That line is used an awful lot as well. Finding people that have a similar kind of passion and insight as you, whatever area that is. Now, for me, in the NHS earlier on, that was actually working in other areas. I do a lot of work in clinical governance and safety, and that was because that was an area that if you wanted to play with the technology, that was generally what you also had to do. So I think sometimes you have to pick up things along the way to get access to the area that you have a real interest in. I think the other thing as well, particularly in the last 10 years or so, was about expanding your network. It takes time. You have to meet with a lot of people. You have to contribute a lot of your time and your thinking. Just be open to contribute, and be generous and kind with other people as well. Because as you build that, I may be saying things that are obvious, but particularly in digital health, as a novel area, listening to startups make their pitch, giving some general advice over a coffee, taking the time to meet with patient groups and offering your opinion. Is something that can burn up some of your time, but is completely invaluable. And I am where I am now, and some of the people that I've met along the way are in kind of similar positions all over the place, and we still have these contacts. So I think I'm sure it applies everywhere. That network is important. And then the final thing, at least for a doctor and anyone in healthcare, it's actually in some ways very easy. You just make the patient your first concern. It's very easy to sort of disappear into your own concerns about how my job can be made easier. But if you start with the patient, what's important to the patient? What's the important outcome for the patient? How can I help them? Really listen to them. That opened up a lot of opportunities for me to do innovative things.
That's great. Keith, it's, as I say, it's a pleasure. It's great talking to you, always is. Thanks for spending the time with us. I hope everybody gets as much out of it as I did. And yeah, look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really nice speaking to you. Thank you. And good luck to everyone out there who has their hidden passion that they want to develop in. It takes time, but when you get there, it's great.
Well done. Fantastic. Thanks, Keith.
Bye now.